Hey guys, it's Mitch. How's it going? Alright, who's ready to go down a rabbit hole? You know what? I was thinking of starting this video that way anyway, and then I realized the pun, and I pushed through regardless, because that's what you guys deserve. We're looking today at Bucky O'Hare #1 from Continuity Comics. So, before we get into the comic, we're going to get into the history a little bit. Anybody who just wants to look at the comic, check in the description, I put chapters in there. So, most people, if they remember Bucky O'Hare, they probably remember the cartoon, which lasted for 13 episodes. They might remember the toys, although there probably aren't too many who have seen a Bucky O'Hare or Deadeye Duck figure in person. They might even have played the video game. I don't know how many read the comic though, and the comic is fascinating. The idea for the comic started in 1978, just after Star Wars was released, when Larry Hama thought he could do a similar space opera kind of idea with anthropomorphized characters. At that time, he was working as an editor at DC, and one of the young up-and-comers he was working with was an artist named Michael Golden. A lot of people know that name now. He's in the discussion with some of the greatest names in comic history. Back then, he was a guy who had started in commercial art before making the move to comics and showing a whole lot of promise right off the bat. But with the Bucky O'Hare comic, Larry Hama had originally thought to write and draw it himself. But once he got a good look at Michael Golden's art, he decided this was the guy who should be the artist on this book. He gave Golden a big file folder full of character designs and lore details and asked him for his version of those designs. And at the same time, he was pitching the series to DC, but not making a whole lot of progress. This was because Hama had secured the rights to the property, and at that time, DC didn't usually publish creator-owned work. And while the idea had potential, I guess they didn't think it was enough potential to make it worthwhile figuring out how to draft up a new kind of contract. Ultimately, it became a moot point as the DC implosion hit, resulting in significant staff cuts and new properties getting put on hold. So Hama and Golden left DC at that time, going to work for Marvel, where Golden would become a star drawing Micronauts and co-creating Rogue of the X-Men. But in the meantime, the two of them continued to shop around the Bucky O'Hare idea until they found a receptive ear in Neil Adams at Continuity Comics. And over the next 5 years, they developed the project together, with Adams being very particular about how he thought the project should progress. Hama originally envisioned it as more of a gritty space drama, while Adams thought it should lean heavier into the family-friendly, funny animal direction, with an eye towards merchandising for toys and cartoons. Eventually, Adams got his way, and the first installment of Bucky O'Hare was published in Echo of Future Past #1, which was a color anthology book. Future Past lasted for 9 issues, with Bucky O'Hare featuring in the first 6. And when it was eventually shelved, those 6 episodes were collected into an oversized graphic novel, which they stripped down to black and white. And that was it for Bucky O'Hare until 5 years later, when Neil Adams had managed to negotiate merchandising deals for the Bucky O'Hare cartoon, the toy line, and the video game. It's important to note that it was Neil Adams doing the negotiating, not Larry Hama or Michael Golden, because while they retained the rights to the property, like the rights to the name, the contract they had signed with Continuity gave Continuity the rights to distribute it. Remember that for later on. In the meantime, Bucky O'Hare became a minor hit, and Continuity wanted to capitalize on its momentum by reprinting the Future Past installments in comic book form. And they could just decide to do that, since they had the rights. But the way they went about it was flat out messed up, because the pages weren't designed for comic book size. They were designed for magazine size. So the art didn't fit. And Neil Adams and Continuity decided to get around that by just changing the comic. They broke up pages into separate panels, photocopied art, and produced new art to flesh out pages that didn't make sense anymore. That first issue of Bucky O'Hare went from being 6 pages of an anthology entry to a 20-page comic book with no additional work from Larry Hama or Michael Golden. In addition, they had to come up with new color plates for the art because the original colors by Corey Adams, Neil Adams' daughter, were great. They were tailored to the art. Problem was that they no longer matched the chopped up pages. And if you've seen latter-day Continuity books from the late 80s, you know their color was not one of their strengths. Golden in particular was incensed, saying that the lousy coloring had obscured a lot of his fine line work. But the comic was produced, and Larry Hama completed a script for a follow-up. However, things were not good with Michael Golden. Golden was furious over how Continuity had defaced his pages, and refused to produce any more work for them. And Larry Hama could have gone ahead and found another artist for the project. And I think Michael Golden would have ultimately been okay with it. But because Larry Hama is a fucking G, he stood by his guy and walked out the project with him. And Bucky O'Hare wouldn't be seen again for decades as a result. Which brings us to the comic itself. So here we are finally at Bucky O'Hare #1. We can start with the cover, which is, I don't know, fine, I guess. And not for a #1, though. Like, if this had been the cover to issue 2 or 3, I think, this would have been all right. But for the first issue of this comic, nah, I don't think so, man. What you want for the first issue is the cover for the graphic novel, I would think. You know, that shit's incredible. Or you get the giant poster that Michael Golden did. And you get that in somehow. I don't know if it fits exactly in a comic-sized format, but, like, you know, put a border around it or something. That thing's incredible. This, like, what's the focus of this? The kid? The kid is barely in this comic. Like, well, you know, you'll figure that out, you know, as we go through it. The first, like, 3/4 of this book is about Bucky O'Hare and his anthropomorphic buddies. But they're kind of just shoved on the wayside here. Also, I'm pretty sure this isn't a Michael Golden cover. You know, I said in the intro that continuity made up new art assets without bringing in Michael Golden or Larry Hama. I think the covers are included in the new creations because the rendering isn't right on these characters. It is kind of close, to be honest. Apparently to the point where Michael Golden has difficulty remembering what he penciled in this and what he didn't. It's a little easier when you have them to compare side by side, so I'm going to try and do that as much as I can. But yeah, so this is a, you know, fine cover, I guess. Just, again, not for #1. All right, so, oh my God. So, Cyber Rad, apparently, it's important. Bucky O'Hare, #1, let's go. So we're going to start things off with a chase sequence between Bucky O'Hare and the crew of the Righteous Indignation and their toad pursuers in a page that was not in the original graphic novel. So I imagine stuff like these toad ships, these would have been copied off of model sheets probably. Same with the Righteous Indignation itself. I'm not sure where this dialogue is coming from because I don't think that was in the first version either. And we're going to transition from that to kind of more of the same, really, where I think we're copying off the model sheets. All the dialogue at this point is from the toads. It does sound a bit like Larry Hama. You know, they're kind of chattering between each other saying, you have your firing orders. Let's see what happens when we pop some plasma on them. And it says that's a warp-capable star frigate sporting space colors. Space is the organization that Bucky O'Hare works for. Why hasn't he shifted into hyperspace and left us in his ion stream? Why should he when all we're doing is tickling his galvanometer? Let's go to max voltage and singe their hairy tails off. Like, I could see Larry Hama writing all that. There's not enough, like, description of the ammunition types to kind of, like, push it over the edge. But, yeah, no, I could kind of see that. But, yeah, this is sort of a simplified version of what Michael Golden's going to do later on in the book, with some assets kind of imported in. Like you see in here in the windshield, you can see Bucky, you can see Jenny, you can see Dead-Eyed Duck. And these were taken from a later shot in the book. The toad ships themselves, there's really only one page in the original graphic novel that clearly shows them. So I think they were mostly working off of that. But, okay, so this here is part of page 1. We're on page 4 of the actual comic. We've added all sorts of stuff in here that Larry Hama may or may not have written. It's hard to say. It feels like Larry Hama was a bit more amenable to the changes that were being made because of the difference between the formats. So he might have contributed a bit of extra material. The rest of this here is all going to be like imported assets. Like you can see, you start out with our first big shot of Bucky and Jenny in the pilot seats. It's a great looking shot from what we can see. Again, you know, I mentioned the coloring in this. It is kind of smearing over a lot of the detail and obscuring it. In addition, you can see where the photocopying is already starting. It's probably not a best idea to put a photocopy of your first big hero shot of the main character on the opposite page. These shots here as well, we're going to see multiple times throughout this book. Because as I said before, the original material that they're taking all of this from was like 8 pages long. And they only took like the first 6.5 pages of that. The rest of it is all stretched out and hacked up and photocopied. You know, like this first chase sequence lasts, I think, like 4 pages originally. And they're stretching it out to like 12, 13, something like that. It's kind of ridiculous to the point where this book kind of loses any semblance of plot. You know, like it kind of works in the graphic novel where you start off with a very quick confrontation between the Toads and the Righteous Indignation. You get a feel for the type of combat where the Righteous Indignation is like a more formidable ship than a single Toad flyer, but the Toads tend to swarm them. And, you know, they have some problems during the fight. They're able to kind of get out of it, and then you move on, because that's really all you need to do in a short 8-page story. Here, we're focusing endlessly on this initial chase. Like, if we're looking at the ratio of time spent on this initial chase sequence versus the rest of these 6 issues, it would be like in the beginning of Star Wars, when the Star Destroyer is chasing down the Corvette. If that chase sequence went on for like 10 minutes, it's like, that'd be a little bit unnecessary, man. But, Neil Adams doesn't have a whole lot of material to work with, and he's just going to stretch this thing out as much as he possibly can. Like, even you look at the density of word balloons versus on the original. It's much more dense in the original because Larry Hama is having to pack it all in there. Again, he doesn't have a whole lot of pages to work with. But it kind of works because, Michael Golden's doing the same thing where he's packing a whole bunch of line work in there. So in like just 8 pages, you get an exciting action scene, you get a whole bunch of chatter between all the crew members, so you actually do kind of find out about them a little bit. And you get a whole bunch of great looking artwork that you're going to sit on the page and look at for a while because there is so much dialogue piled on top of them. Here you do end up kind of racing through it, which is probably for the best because some of the artwork doesn't hold up so well. So anyway, the Toads are coming after them, and Bucky and his crew are going to shift into hyperspace, or they're going to try to anyway. There is some great looking stuff here. Like, you look at this background tech, there's a whole bunch of detail in there. It kind of looks like Michael Golden took the idea to make this like a cutesy cartoon book a little far, ballooning those eyes up to like ridiculous proportions. Like that is kind of his thing, but he did go crazy with it in this one. Anyway, then we cut to Dead-Eye Duck, probably the next most recognizable of the Bucky O'Hare characters. He's the team gunner, and we've got Blinky and Bruce in the engine room. And again, we're photocopying shit all over. This is photocopied off of this. This is photocopied off of that, and then somebody drew in an additional arm. This shot and this shot are completely new. This is by whatever artist Neil Adams could wrangle up who could do a Michael Golden type style. And they don't do too bad, really. But you see how far Neil Adams is having to stretch things. Like this right here, this panel is the bottom of page 1 in the original version. This shot again, we already saw this on the last page. Oh, hey, look at that. We finally moved on to page 2. It looks like it would have been originally a pretty good page, except that the color is much muddier than it was originally. Also, strange choice to cut out a couple of the Toad ships that were in pursuit here. But I guess that we need them later on, because again, we're stretching out that dialogue. Look, just 2 dialogue balloons on this whole page, as opposed to, 10, 12 on the original version? Kind of ridiculous. And then we got to get an ad for Continuity Comics, where some kid's going to hold his breath till he turns blue until his local LCS gets in more Continuity Comics, because they're so good, they keep selling out. All right, so here's all the dialogue that was originally on the previous page. It's all been kind of imported onto this one, which is done by some other artist. Nobody knows who, because nobody was credited. You'll note probably that I'm not explaining very much about what's going on, because nothing's fucking going on. It's just like it's a chase in space, so that's something. The Toads keep flying around and shooting at the Righteous Indignation, and they hit him every once in a while. That's about it. There's that shot of Bucky yet again. That's 3 times already, like in the first sequence. I wonder if that shot shows up again in issue 2. This is taken from that splash. Like, this is all, this splash right here. We got to do a close-up photocopy, bring it up close. I don't just want to turn it into a game of find the photocopies or find the scrub art, but it's kind of hard to avoid because there's not a whole lot else in this comic, really. And it is so blatant when you have the original pages to compare it to. Okay, anyway, the engine room takes a direct hit, and Bruce is vaporized, so I guess he doesn't get to be a toy. Blinky is left by himself, which is probably a good thing. You don't necessarily need 2 guys in the engine room, right? That's a little extraneous. Here we get a splash page that used to just be a quarter of a page panel, but we got to stretch that shit out. At least they included all the dialogue that was in the one panel. It kind of works now with the pace. Interesting note with the characters here. You'll note they have all sorts of like pegs on their belts. This is for the toy designs. Apparently this was like right from the beginning. I think when Larry Hama was designing them originally, he designed them with all sorts of pegs all over belts and stuff like that. You look at the foot here, he's got like a hole in his foot. That's so you can put them on a stand. The pegs are so you can put all sorts of accessories on them. So they were thinking merchandising from the hop. I mean, which makes sense, particularly considering this was patterned after Star Wars to an extent. And I mean, the thing that drove Star Wars was the toys. The movie was good, and it was a special effects breakthrough kind of movie at that. But if we're talking about what made all the money, it was the toys. They built George Lucas's fortune. So anyway, getting back to this, Bucky has to get back to checking on the engine room. That's all that's happening here. This was another panel that got blown up to be a splash page, which I actually didn't realize they used previously. There we go. They just kind of set it on its side. It's like they turned it 90 degrees. I guess that works a little better than just like flat out photocopying the same shot 3 times in a row. But anyway, the righteous indignation is taking a lot of heavy fire, and the Toads are starting to get overconfident. They get a little too close and, shoots a couple down. That's when Bucky O'Hare climbs down into the gunner's spot. Oh, I guess he was checking on Deadeye first. He says, "Good shot, Deadeye. Remind me to put you in for the space gunnery and invective medal," which is kind of funny. Deadeye responds, saying, "Already got one of those, Bucky, but I'll take the oak leaf cluster for vituperative vehemence." That's tough to say. And all sorts of hacked up art in here. This is the original panel here at the bottom of what was originally page 4, which was cloned for this panel down here, and then just, I think they photocopied a head off of something else and pasted it on there, maybe there as well. Not very expertly, I gotta say. Like, you really get kind of a weird experience reading this, because like some of these panels look pretty great when the colorist can ease back for a second. This one down here looks absolutely fine. And then this looks like such a fucking hack job. This is obviously imported from something else and doesn't even have anything to do with anything. It's just, I think we had a space here. We got to fill it up with something. Anyway, Bucky eventually gets down to the engine room and he's talking to Blinky. Blinky's saying how the warp drive has been damaged. And if they try to use it, he can't tell what exactly will happen. It might blow up. It might work. Something in between could happen. Who knows? What's the worst that can happen? Because, they obviously keep taking hits. So they're going to give it a shot. And then, meanwhile, we are going to switch to somewhere else. We're kind of changing up the pacing here because in the original version, then they flip the switch. But we need to break things up a little bit because we still got a few pages left to fill out. So from there, we're going to flip to San Francisco. We got a big old background shot here. It's a pretty good one. This used to be a considerably smaller panel, but it still holds up pretty well. The whole thing with Michael Golden is that he would sit on a page for, oh my God, so many fucking ads for continuity books. He would sit on a page forever and just noodle away. Again, this panel here used to be a fair bit smaller, but it holds up. Anyway, now we're finally going to meet that kid from the cover. Like, this is, I think, page 15. And we're finally, we're not going to see whatever's going on here. I think this is more an issue 2 or issue 3 thing, maybe. But we're finally meeting this kid who is apparently central to the book. The book that is called Bucky O'Hare, of course. So this is Willie, and he lives in San Francisco with his reasonably wealthy hippie parents, I think. And Willie's a science nerd, and his parents don't really approve of that. They think it's a little selfish and a waste of time, whereas time better spent would be spent at, like, an anti-nuke rally, or doing Zen archery, ceramics, macrame, or reading Sartre or Gurdjieff. Meanwhile, his parents are just kind of in the background here, being blasé and kind of insufferable, really. I've said it before, but I don't think I've said it in this video, that Larry Hama was a Vietnam War vet, and specifically a weapons master. So I'm guessing like rich suburbanites in San Francisco who go to rallies and eat health food and poo-poo everybody else who doesn't, they're probably pretty low on the ladder to somebody like Larry Hama. I don't know. I mean, that's just a guess. I wouldn't disagree if that was his opinion. Back to Bucky, still with all sorts of explosions going off around him. I don't know. Maybe they're dying. That could be it. Anyway, Willie finishes up his breakfast and he's going to go to his room. His parents are like, "All right, son, we'll talk about this sometime later when your head's in a better place. That cool with you?" And he's like, "Yeah, sure, Dad." And then Mom's like, "Honey, it's getting late. We better get on our way." He's like, "Okay, let's take the VW bus. It's so much more proletarian." It's like, "I'll get your cape." And they just kind of leave their son there so that they can go and do their conscientious objector thing, I suppose. And Willie locks himself in his room. Pretty well detailed little room here, particularly considering this was just the bottom of one page before. Again, you blow it up and it still kind of stands up. It's a little bit basic for Michael Golden. You know, if he knew it was going to be a 2-page spread, he probably would have thrown in a whole lot more detail. Oh, we're getting that shot again of Jenny. That kind of terrifying shot, really. But yeah, back with the righteous indignation, Jenny is reporting to Bucky that the situation's critical. They're losing speed and power fast. If they don't warp out within 30 seconds, they'll never make it. Is that the same shot from a couple pages ago? No, maybe not. I'm pretty sure we've seen it before, though. And Bucky is... there's that shot that got squished into the dead-eyed duck panel there. Right there. Bucky's faced with... he doesn't really have a choice anymore. They're up against the wall. He's got to do something. This is kind of the only thing left he can do. So they turn on the warp drive. Meanwhile, back in Willie's house, apparently his interest in science is quite developed to the point where he's developed a photon accelerator here. Although we don't find that out. But anyway, I guess he's trying it out, and he flips the switch at pretty much the same time as Bucky does. And then the lights seem to go out, and he goes, huh? And that's the comic. So it's kind of funny because, that isn't where the first chapter in the anthology ended. They went on to explain that it is a photon accelerator he has. He goes to check outside, and for some reason, everything outside is black too. His clock is going crazy. The toads start showing up on his TV. And then something starts trying to open his door. And, it's a much better cliffhanger for the end of an issue as opposed to just he throws a switch to a machine that we get no explanation for and then is confused. But, I don't know. They really had to stretch out that fight scene, I guess. But you see what I mean about the hack job? I've never seen art that was this mangled tried to shove together into, a completely different format. Yeah, the page sizes, but also the length of the book. And yeah, continuity is just fuck it, we'll do it anyway. It won't remotely make for, a satisfying read, but Neil Adams doesn't know a whole lot about that anyway, judging from the way he writes continuity books. So that's Bucky O'Hare #1. It's a mess. There's good stuff in it, but the amount of hacking done on Michael Golden's pages is something else. But you might wonder, how come there hasn't been any new Bucky O'Hare material since this series came out? Actually, after watching that video, you might not wonder that. You might wonder how the fuck Bucky O'Hare ever got to the point where it was licensed. But you gotta remember the sequence of events. Cartoon and the toys and the video game came out first. Then this car crash of a comic. So let's say you're not wondering why no more Bucky O'Hare material was ever produced. But I was wondering it. So remember what I said at the beginning about continuity owning the distribution rights to Bucky O'Hare? Well, apparently those rights are in perpetuity. And while Continuity Comics doesn't exist as a company anymore, it does exist as a shell company holding on to certain rights, including those distribution rights. In addition, the rights to the cartoon were acquired by Hasbro, and the rights to the video game reverted to Konami. So let's say someone wanted to revisit Bucky O'Hare. They want to go the full merchandising route. Comic, cartoon, video game, all of it. There are potentially 4 parties they would have to deal with in order to get it done. Hama and Golden can't create new comic book material without going through the continuity estate. Anyone else trying to reprint old Bucky material has to deal with Hama and Golden for the rights to the name, and they have to deal with continuity for distribution. If someone different wants to create a new Bucky comic, same thing. You have to go to all of them to create a derivation work, and Golden is extremely resistant to revisiting Bucky after the continuity cock-up. Same again, if you wanted to use the theme song from the cartoon or reference any of that lore. You have to deal with Hasbro, Hama, and Golden, paying off of each of them. Same with the game. Have fun dealing with Konami. It's a clusterfuck. And while there is some nostalgia for Bucky O'Hare, it was never a massive hit like it was in Ninja Turtles. So a developer isn't likely to make big money on a revival. When you look at all the legal red tape someone would have to wade through just to make a Netflix cartoon, all the parties they would have to pay off, it just isn't worth it. Which is a bit of a shame, because I know I wouldn't mind seeing Larry Hama get paid for something like that. I should note, that intro, I know it went a little bit long. That is the Coles Notes. When I started this thing off talking about going down a rabbit hole, that's what I went down when I was learning about the history of this friggin' book. If you want to find out more about the history of Bucky O'Hare, or about Michael Golden, say, what I would do is recommend checking out Uncle Jerk's documentary about Michael Golden. Specifically, in this case, part 2 of the 4-part Michael Golden documentary. I'll try to remember to leave a link in the description there. But if you're ever on like a 12-hour plane ride or something, you could do a lot worse than downloading some of Uncle Jerk's documentaries. Like, you think my shit gets into the weeds. Man. I don't have the resources to go about interviewing people for background information. So let me know in the comments what you thought of Bucky O'Hare. For this one, though, that's going to do it. Thanks very much for watching, guys. Don't forget to hit like on your way out. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. If you're watching on mobile, hit the hype button. So many things to click. You can also click the link to my Patreon and subscribe there. And you can follow me on Instagram and DM me there for commissions. But, yeah, that's going to do it. Thanks again for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.